Hi, I'm Pastor Chris. I am the senior minister at First Congregational Church of Naples, Florida, and also the executive director and co-founder of Supply and Multiply, a ministry my family and I founded while living in Haiti some number of years ago. And I am happy to welcome you today to this conversation that I'm going to be having with the grief guru, Kelly Nielsen. And I just want to tell you, welcome to the Pilgrim Path podcast. And I'm hoping that this conversation is a blessing to you. And I'm looking forward to this conversation very much with this person who shares a passion for a type of healing ministry with me. And it's something that's so important. So welcome, Kelly. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became the grief guru?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Chris, for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation. And as I often share with people, nobody grows up wanting to be the grief guru. It was not an aspiration that I had as a young girl, but life happens and we make the best with what comes our way. So my journey with grief really started almost about 5 years ago now, the morning of February 1st, 2017, when my father notified me that my mom had committed suicide. And having been at that point, been a person of faith and walking with the Lord for 10 years, that shook me to my core. When I say that it was a devastating event, that's an understatement. I was not equipped or prepared for the physical shock, the emotional shock, like what happens to you in those moments. I remember specifically, not even being able to get dressed, like my mind and body did not work together. And it was a crisis of faith for me. I really thought this whole faith thing was a cruel joke. I thought I had been bamboozled, that, I had put my faith in God. I thought that he was with me and protecting us and all this stuff. And it really was a crisis for me in terms of my faith, but also grief just really had its way with me. It was really debilitating. I had a tough time for months. Not sleeping, not eating, just barely going through the motions. I was actually in a leadership position in a ministry and had to step down because I could hardly lead myself out of bed in the morning, much less lead anyone else. So for several months, I existed like that. And the thing that breaks my heart is I went to the church and asked for help, and they didn't have help for me. They didn't have resources. And because my mom committed suicide and the nature of her passing, it was like, kind of too big and ugly for my friends. And, nobody knew what to say. So I felt incredibly isolated and alone. I thought there was no help or hope for me. I eventually did go to the police department, actually referred me to a suicide support group. So I went to a suicide support group and I was comforted that everyone in the room knew what I was going through. It was so nice to be around people who got it. But I was horrified at the fact that everyone in the room was in the same condition I was. And in their case, it had been months or even years since they lost their loved ones. And so I saw these people who were just surviving life. They had not recovered. Half of the people in the group were unable to work because they were just so consumed with the sorrow and grief of it. And so I began to just believe that this is what life's going to be like now. I'm just going to be sad and surviving for the rest of my life. And this just is what it is. And thankfully for me, a few months after that, I saw a speaker speak at a conference, an amazing woman, Immaculée, who had survived the Rwandan genocide. And she shared with us on stage how she was hid away in a bathroom for 90 days with 8 other women and how God protected her and she survived. But most importantly to me, she shared how God walked her through this healing journey. And I saw this woman full of life and full of joy and full of peace on stage. And it was like this light bulb went off over my head and hopelessness broke off of me. And I said, oh my goodness, if she can do it, I can do it. And if God will do it for her, he'll do it for me. So I decided right then and there that I would recover. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how long it would take, but I knew in that moment that it was possible and that I was going to do it. And so I began to study. I began to study God's word, get into prayer. I began to study about our minds and bodies, what happens to us physically when we go through grief and trauma. And I started making adjustments and just paying attention to what was helpful and what was not helpful. And I started to feel better. I started to get back on my feet. And I'm so thankful that I did when I did, because several months after that, my son passed away of a drug overdose. So about 6 months after I found this kind of healing revelation and started healing from the loss of my mom, my son passed away of an overdose. And so, as any parent who's lost a child, it's horrific, right? It's awful. It's most of our biggest fear is to lose a child. So their grief was again, and it was massive in my life, but I had the tools this time to address it. And so my grieving mourning experience was night and day different. And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, this works. It can be taught, and other people need to know this. And so that is what I've been doing. My son passed away on July 8th, 2018. So for the last 3+ years, I have committed myself and my life and my career to sharing these tools with other people and helping people recover from grief and loss, and just, if nothing else, be another example that it is possible, that healing is possible.
That's fantastic. I have a strong interest in helping people heal through grief and through sorrow and all manner of suffering. And it's like the anti-popular version of church these days. My wife, my kids, sometimes when I give them an answer to something as to one of these harder questions, sometimes they're like, "Hey, maybe you could just soften that up a bit and just fluff it up a little." And but the truth is that so many people are suffering. I did my doctoral dissertation on the topic of human suffering and the sovereignty of God. And what led me to doing that, I was working on seminary degrees for years, and I finally was nearly done with my doctorate. I had to make a decision. It was a doctor of ministry degree, and I had to make a decision on my doctoral project, and it was due, I don't know, on a Wednesday or a Thursday. I had to finally submit my final proposal, and I'd been working on it and tweaking it, and I wasn't sure. I had 3 or 4 ideas. And then one weekend, I was then pastor of a church in Illinois. In one weekend, on a Saturday morning, I officiated the funeral of a late term, essentially a stillbirth, from family that, friends, members of the church that are like family to this day. And it was heart-wrenching what had happened. And the details of it, the way it played out, was just so heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. And so that Saturday morning, I officiated the funeral for this baby. That afternoon, I officiated the wedding. The same day, I officiated the wedding for another member of the church who were first cousins to this family. That morning, everyone was at the funeral. And then the following Sunday morning, I was supposed to dedicate a baby for another church family who decided that, given the gravity of the weekend, we postponed it. But at the end of that weekend, that day, Saturday, was some kind of, the kind of pastoral experience that you just can't forget. I mean, that morning I wept with those who wept, in keeping with Jesus' instructions, right? I was heartbroken with them and was bearing one another's burdens. And then about 2 hours later, there was a bride all dressed in white, walking down an aisle, and I did the very best I could. And I was actually kind of impressed, because afterwards people are like, "Gosh, you really were really joyful for them." I'm like, I was rejoicing with those who rejoice. I mean, it was a kind of meditative practice for me to really be obedient to the word of God to the extent that I was able, but I was exhausted at the end of that weekend. And the following Sunday night, I said to my wife, I know what my project will be. I didn't know exactly what it would turn into, but what it ended up becoming was a grief share program that I offer at the churches. That's about a 6-week program that, due to a number of factors, not the least of which was the gravity of the project, for the first few years after I earned my doctorate, I never implemented it. And I would come to it and write it and rewrite it. And finally I did it. And I found that it had so much potential. And the emphasis is giving people a theological framework around which a biblical theological framework around which to sort of understand God's potential purposes and redeeming work through pain. Like, I'm always pointing people essentially to the cross. And the thing that I think actually becomes most valuable, sometimes there's theological questions that get answered, it helps people, but it's a group of people coming together and sharing with one another. And it's like sometimes I'm able to open their minds to different ways of thinking biblically about their pain. And like you said, there are really practical tools. There are so many people who are completely unaware of those things and stay trapped in grief and sorrow and anger and all the things that come along with it, sometimes for decades.
Yeah.
And so, for years I've been doing at around Christmas time, a blue Christmas service on the longest day of the year. And again, it's like, I'm like the anti-prosperity preacher. Like I want to dive into your pain with you and help you find a way out of it. And this year we're not doing it. And instead I was fishing around for different ideas. And one of the things I love to use in churches is Christian comedy. And I was hunting for a Christian comedian in the area, and I found you. And I said, oh, here we go. I said, yeah, okay. So on New Year's Eve at First Congregational Church of Naples at 6 p.m., you're going to be here sharing. I've been, using some of your marketing material, hopefully not misrepresenting you, not any more than necessary, due to the fact that we only just are getting to know each other. Basically encouraging people to come, because I know for sure that the last couple of years, this church included, people have gone through a lot. A lot of people have lost loved ones, and some of them are grieving the loss of the last 2 years, businesses, all kinds of things. And I want to give people an opportunity in Naples to come, and maybe, it's like somebody told me, hey, I want to go to a New Year's Eve party on New Year's Eve. I said, well, go after you come and open up your mind a little bit to some of the possibilities of ringing in the new year, as it were. Learning how to, or beginning a journey, turning a corner with regard to advancing through adversity, which is a phrase I found repeated on a number of your materials. And so I'm excited to have you. And what do you think? What do you think about those things? I guess because I know you've also written at least one book on the topic. You have a group study. What do you think about that? I mean, what can you said you went to your church, and I totally understand that. You went to your church and it was like the resources weren't readily available.
Right.
In some cases, some pastors aren't even really, it's one of those things. They teach you how to be a theologian in seminary. They don't always teach you how to walk with somebody through, like you might graduate seminary. Sadly, it's very likely, almost certain, you'll graduate seminary and never have been shown how to do a funeral, never have been shown how to do a wedding. Like the practical side of ministry is sometimes really neglected in that formal training. And not to throw seminaries under the bus, but that's just kind of the way it is. And so what do you think about? I mean, what can the church community, what can we and should we be doing to be more well equipped for these things?
Well, exactly. I have so many thoughts. Exactly. Pastors don't get the practical training, or they're way overburdened. They're understaffed and overburdened. If they have a large congregation and somebody dies this week and somebody dies, they do the funeral and they do a call afterwards, but really walking someone through to recovery and healing is a different thing altogether. And so a lot of them don't have the time or the tools to do that. And another piece that's really important for me is you can be an amazing pastor and you may be able to hold space, but there is a certain amount of knowing that comes from walking through it yourself. And so that's why, what I do is grief coaching, and I work with other coaches who've been through loss, who can walk someone else through loss, because we have an experiential knowing that lends to the other person's even neurological system believing that healing's possible when they're working with someone who's walking in healing. But to speak real quickly about the faith piece of it and being, disenchanted or confused with, God's place in suffering and your pain and everything. And that's one of the gifts that trauma, tragedy, adversity, fill in the blank. There's some gifts that are available to us in the midst of that. And one of them is, it's a testing of your faith. Before my mom passed away, I would have told you that I had an unshakable faith. I would have told you that I trusted the Lord implicitly with me and my whole family. And then when my mom died, turns out my faith was shakeable, but we don't know where those spots are until they're tested and exposed. And so thankfully, And I had to grapple with that. And I had to, the church didn't have resources for me. So it was very personal. I couldn't go to church at first. I was so frustrated. And then I remember going to church and all these people were singing about this faithful God. And I wanted to punch them all in the face. Really. I was,
no, I understand.
I was like, you guys, like this faithful God,
Yeah.
And so
I've got joy down in my heart. And you're like,
yeah,
really?
I was so mad. Right. And what I was most upset about was, oh my goodness, God, who was my lifeline. I've been walking with the Lord and received salvation. So I was like, I knew that if I was wrong, if God was not real or who I thought he was, I was done for. I knew there was no hope for me if he didn't. And I had to grapple with that. And I shared with the Lord that I wasn't going to be tithing anymore. I decided that was fair. I was like, well, I'm withholding the tithe for at least a year for pain and suffering. Like you owe me at least that,
Like, yeah.
And I told him that, and he never said anything. He let me have my fit. And then after a season of time, I went back to church and they asked for the tithe, and I felt this poke, Holy Spirit poking me to give the tithe. And I didn't want to, but I did. And I did unwillingly. And I said, God, fine, I'm going to give the tithe. I'm not really happy about it, but I'm going to do it. And when I did that small little act of obedience, God met me in that place. And it's still to this day, I usually tear up when I talk about it because I gave the tithe and the presence of God and the peace of God fell on me to the point that I knelt down at the altar and I heard God say, you've never been more beautiful to me than you are right now. And it was he didn't fix the pain. He didn't take it away. He didn't explain it. He didn't make it make sense. He just was the good and loving Father that I've always known him to be. And he just loved me in that moment. And it was in that place that I discovered that he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, no matter what I'm facing, whether I understand it or not, whether I'm happy about it or not. Like I can always come to him, whatever state I'm in, and I will find him the same. And so that is the birthplace of the faith I walk on today. And that is the opportunity that when people have disappointments or grief or trauma, it's an opportunity to grow in intimacy with God. Bring your questions to him, bring your frustration, bring your angst, and let him meet you in that place and minister to you the way that only he can. And you'll find a much stronger faith on the other side of it, So I love and welcome when people wrestle with God, when they have disappointment and when they have hard times. I think just like any good parent, what he wants from us is to come to him with those things and to bring him our disappointment and to bring him our questions and to be open to have him show us where he was. I thought God had abandoned me. I thought that he was asleep at the wheel and he let this happen to my mom. He didn't let me know ahead of time. I felt and he showed me through a series of events as time went on how he was very much there for me and how he very much provided for me and my mom, even in this situation. And I'm so thankful for that. I think a lot of times though, it's very easy to get stuck in that angry place and not be open to him showing you how he was in fact there. And there are people who, get mad at God and stay mad at God. And like you said, they stay that way for years. And
absolutely. I was officiating a funeral here. I've been in Naples just 1 year, and I had been here, I don't know, a few months. And I said at the funeral to people, I was in at one point in this like message, I said, I moved to Naples. They said it's the nicest place on earth, and I said, I'm driving around in my minivan. I pull up next to, some with great frequency next to a Maserati or a Lamborghini. Say, oh, this is the best place on earth. Literally $100 million houses on the beach. And I said, it's crazy though because my back still hurts, and
right.
and I still get headaches sometimes. It's like the very best this world has to offer. No matter how well we go about insulating ourselves from struggle, we're still, no matter how rich, no matter how poor, no matter who we are, no matter where we live, there's going to be this one constant at least. And we're going to deal with death, and we're going to deal with grief, and we're going to deal with sorrow. And it doesn't matter how many resources you have financially or otherwise. If you don't have the tools to deal with that, you might get, you're going to get locked up in a similar prison. I mean, my family and I lived in Haiti. We continue to do ministry in Haiti. And I was in Haiti once. Well, I've been in Haiti a lot, but I was in Haiti one day preaching. And I said to the people, you all have a gift that so many Americans don't have. And they're like, really, what is that? Tell me what I have that you don't have in my poverty. And I said, there's a kind of soul poverty that exists in America in the churches, because with a sort of prevailing desire to be as happy as possible, as prosperous as possible, there's a certain trend common in our way of doing church and doing Christian life that I don't think sets us up very well for when the tragedy occurs, because of exactly what you just said. It reminded me exactly of that, because in that sermon I said the big earthquake that hit, and earthquakes hit Haiti all the time, but the big earthquake that hit in 2010, it shook your national faith. And there are Christians in Haiti, as an example, that have a more rock solid faith, that have a kind of gripping of God that I am horribly envious of. And it's because in the face of so much adversity, regular death, regular loss, then it really puts you at a place where you figure out what really matters. Relationships, my local church, gripping the hand of God in my trial. When you don't have anywhere else to turn, and you turn to God, and you find the healing that you found, which like you just said, it's not like he's just all in a snap of a finger, but the ongoing relational experience of God constantly giving you the grace you need to continue on the journey. There's a kind of beauty in that I think equipping. So a lot of times, like, people are going to come to me or to you. They're going to come looking to the church. They're going to come looking for some resource when the crisis happens. But I love the idea of getting this kind of information into people's lives, so that at the very least, they say, oh, you know what? That lady Kelly, the grief guru, I bet I should talk to her when the crisis happens. And more than just that, but like, these are the kinds of, this is the kind of information, the kind of knowledge that should be more, let's say, saturated into the life of the church, into people's lives.
And it is something, it's a skill set and muscles that you can develop, and a skill set that you can build. Because let's interject the word disappointment for grief or tragedy or adversity, right? And we all experience that every day on different levels, different scales. And so the 5-step framework that I teach folks is something you absolutely can start learning and applying with any sort of loss or disappointment that you're wrestling with. And the more you practice it, the more you build up those muscles, the more you can handle a heavy adversity that comes. It's like going to the gym. You don't go in there and lift, 400 pounds day one, but the more you do it and apply and practice, if that opportunity presents itself, you're better equipped for it. And so, for people who have the shock of a major loss and they haven't been building these muscles, they now have the opportunity to start building those muscles, and it prepares them for whatever comes down the road. But it also prepares you to handle blessings as well, like these things that we build, the formation of a rock solid faith, and the disciplines and practices of being mindful and taking really great care of ourselves and having really great boundaries and doing all the things to be healthy, productive people, serve us in all areas. It's not just about surviving the hardship, it's about being able to carry the blessing as well. That's something that God had to personally, he's like, Kelly, I'm not just making you stronger to endure problem after problem after problem. I'm also creating in you the capacity to hold the blessing. And so I think it's really easy for all of us as a society, when it's been problem after problem and pandemic and overdose and racial issues, we're just always bracing for the next bad thing. But God wants to also use what's been formed in you in the bad things to have you carry good things. So it's a good discipline to remind ourselves it's not always bad things. God has good plans for us. And sometimes they fall on the same day, exactly like you said, the wedding and the funeral. I find that often amazing things and difficult, hard things happen at the exact same time. And the ability to hold that tension and to honor both experiences and to recognize both experiences for what they are is part of the beauty of the human experience and how God designed us, Oh,
absolutely. Here's my sons and I, we are heavily engaged in martial arts, and I have been most of my life in one way or another. And we, in addition to teaching karate, a kind of a Christian karate program that I use as an outreach tool in the churches. We started in the last 5 months doing jujitsu. And jujitsu, for those who don't know, is essentially like wrestling. It's like a Japanese wrestling that wound up in Brazil, and now it's way better. Well, it's funny. Okay, so a lot of people think that they know how to defend themselves. They know how to deal with an attack. Okay, and I'm likening this to a major crisis in your life, like a death, a tragic loss, a divorce, all the things that can lead, and like you said, all the way to the mundane, like I just dealing with disappointment. And a lot of people think they can defend themselves. I'm a former Marine. I'm a fairly strong guy. And when I showed up my first night to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm also, I have a karate black belt. I was a boxer. I'm like, I'm a tough guy, And I showed up to do Jiu-Jitsu, and it turns out that the knowledge of Jiu-Jitsu for someone who's been doing it for years is way more useful than all my strength and all my toughness. And on my first night, I got wrapped up like a pretzel by a guy who's like half my size. And I said, okay, I'm really glad I came here to learn this, because I have to learn this. And the thing is, I was just talking to my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu professor last night about this. As he said, oh, you're getting better, you're doing great and whatever. And my sons are doing great. And we were talking about different martial arts. And he said, for some of those martial arts, you need natural ability. Like when I was a boxer, I got to a level of boxing where I realized that the difference between somebody learning it and somebody with just all kinds of natural skill set and talent, super athletic, the gap started to get bigger and bigger the higher I ascended in competition. But he said in jiu-jitsu, anybody can learn this. If you learn the techniques, it can make you as if you're stronger, as if you're faster, if you just spend time on the mat. And, I love to use martial arts as an analogy for spiritual life anyway. And I'm not alone. The Apostle Paul does. It's found all throughout the Bible, the warfare analogy and the spiritual warfare life.
Right.
And, I think a lot of what we'll be doing on New Year's Eve when you're here, and a lot of what you're doing is like equipping people for the spiritual battles that really come our way on a regular and consistent basis. I mean, the truth is, everybody who does martial arts knows that you mostly are training for a fight you never have to have. You're mostly super equipped for something that most of the time isn't going to happen. But conversely, a lot of Christians are way under-equipped when it comes to dealing with these battles. And these battles actually come every day.
Right.
So I love what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to it. And I think there is a desperate need for more ministries like this in the churches, in general. I mean, what have you seen as far as, maybe, I'm not necessarily, testimonies of people's lives, and maybe you want to share that. I don't know. But I mean, since you've gotten so fully engaged in doing this the last few years, what are some of the things that you've seen happen? I mean, let's say first in you, right? Like one of the things that I love when I was reading your story and why I reached out to you is I think that a lot of people, when God heals them, this is one of the sessions of my Grief Share program, is what I basically did is looked at all the different sort of traditions of Christian thought when it comes to suffering and God's sovereignty. And then I tried to find what the beauty in that was, and then help people so it could really be something that could talk about the full spectrum of Christian understanding on these ideas. And one of them is, pulling mostly from charismatics, the idea of spiritual warfare. And when I look at you, I say, oh, okay, so you probably found out through this process that you learned some new things about yourself, probably, in your ability to help unequip others. In the last few years, I wonder what maybe you've learned about yourself. And then also, what have you seen others, God do in their life through the ministry that God's given you? Yeah.
Well, for me, it was very profound in the sense that this is my calling, this is my purpose. So for me, I've stepped into, it was the culmination of all my lifelong experiences and the way that God wired me and designed me and gifted me, all came crashing together into this assignment that I feel that I have for the rest of my life. So it was hugely, profound and changed my life on every level. And that is the opportunity, to small scale to large scale, that that is available to everyone when they go through hardship, adversity, whatever. God uses all of that. He uses all things for those that love him and are called according to his purposes for their good. And so even the worst thing, if you can be open to the idea that somehow, some way, God intends to use that for his purposes in your life, and it could actually be the thing that hurt you the most could be the very key to opening up the door to your greatest contentment, your greatest ministry, your greatest joy, whatever it might be. One of the things I always say is that your past does not define you, it prepares you. So if people can start to see disappointment and heartache and adversity not as just something bad that happens to us, but that's something that forms in us the very thing that we needed to be able to go do the thing, that the inner desire of our heart, the thing that we've always wanted to do. Maybe we didn't even realize it was the thing we always wanted to do, but that is the idea of advancing through adversity. And I love that we're doing our talk on New Year's Eve, because every single person has something to grieve in 2021, right? Yeah. But can we internalize and metabolize that so that we can go into 2022 finding the treasure, the adventure, the journey that is on the other side of the loss of 2021. And that is when people can move, and I see it happen with my clients. It's my favorite thing. When they go from just suffering and hurting and start to see that there's something they could potentially be doing with the hurt and the heartache that is meaningful, not for just themselves, but for other people, because that's how God wired us. We're built like him. We're built to be interdependent and connected. We're also built to be creating things in the world, creating solutions in the world, and helping other people. That's inherently how we're designed. And I don't care who you talk to, you're not fully alive, fully content, fully at joy until you're walking out your purpose in that way, until you're contributing to something that makes the world and people around you better. And that is the opportunity that lies in the rubble of all this heartache and trauma. And so that's going to be the focus of our talk on the 31st, is like, okay, all this awful stuff happened. We don't just get healed just to get healed. We get healed so that we can go make a difference in other people's lives. And that is really where the magic happens. That's where God, takes what was meant for evil and turns it for good. And that some of the most fulfilling, satisfying moments that I've had have been in these last 3 years, and the opportunities that I have to speak into people's lives and encourage them, or what I wouldn't trade that for anything, but I don't know if I was given the choice, I may ask for my mom and son back if I was given the choice, but I'm, since those decisions weren't up to me in the hand, I'm living a very full, very meaningful, joy-filled life that I don't know that I can say confidently, I wouldn't be in this place had those things not happen. And that's the path that's available to people. And I understand it takes people a little bit to get to that place of excited, but I see it happen time and time again. And that's what I'm most excited about sharing. And my favorite part of working with clients and people is when that light bulb goes off, that, oh, I don't just need to endure the rest of my life. This hard thing actually can make, can be an adventure and a treasure hunt to seek out and discover the ways that I can make this meaningful,
Oh, absolutely. I think that the underlying that is a big challenge for us as the average American. We're very hardwired towards a kind of worldview that is unwittingly, for most people, very me-centered. And we start to think, well, then I'm going through this tragedy, and then we can kind of implode when there's healing comes in large measure as we start to give things away. Right. And instead of carrying all those burdens, it's like when the Bible tells us to share one another's burdens. I mean, it's not just like a spiritual principle of, oh, be nice to people. No, it's like, we were built for carrying heavy loads. That's part of our design. And God, like you said, has given everyone a sort of inherent calling and purpose. And so many people are living lives inconsistent with their purpose, something that I would call even unnatural living. Right. In that doctoral dissertation of mine and the curriculum I developed out of it, this grief share program, I call it the Sacrament of Suffering, which again, it's like another one of those examples where my kids would be like, hey, can't you call it like get happy, And it's like, no, because that's what it is. It's the sacred suffering, pain, loss can be viewed as a kind of sacred event, a sacred part of our life. And again, like I'm convinced, as a sort of theological premise, a basic biblical understanding of what it means to be a Christian, of what it means to be alive in Christ, of what it means to understand God's message in the history of the church, the witness of the church, and in the Bible, you have to look at the cross. And at the cross, this is the greatest and worst event in all of history. And like we were just talking about, wrapped up like the colors of a candy cane, like this two inexorable realities present at the cross: the grace of God poured out, the wrath of God satisfied, the sin of man forgiven, the consequence of sin being brought into a whole new understanding through what? Through the greatest painful event of all history. And so we can't divorce ourselves from the reality. I think sometimes people are like trying to run away from suffering. And like I said earlier, it's like you can run and hide from it, but that's one reality you cannot escape. So are you going to live under the weight of it? Just last night I'm at jiu-jitsu, and there's a certain guy I trained jiu-jitsu with who's like, I'm a big guy and he's probably got 100 pounds on me and he's pure muscle. Well, he's mostly muscle, let's say, and a lot of him. And you start out the match and I do everything possible to stay on top of him. Oh, but if he gets on top of me, I can barely breathe. So you've got to learn techniques. You've got to learn some legitimate strategy. The inclination is just to spaz out, and that never works. You've got to learn some legitimate techniques and some tools, some of the people, so you can reverse that situation. And I found over the years in pastoral ministry this strange reality that only makes me more and more wanting to have people like you, that God's given you giftings and ministry, people like you in the lives of the churches that I serve and in the communities where I serve, giving you a platform to do that ministry. Because in the churches, the people that I have found who understand like grieving the best, they're always nurses. Without exception, they're nurses. And it's because those nurses have been trained from like a medical perspective on the grief cycle, grief process, the steps of grief. But however, like not every nurse has also been equipped spiritually or personally gone through those tragedy, like you're talking about, the need for identification to see someone who's experiencing healing. And so it's like we really, really, really need this in the life of the church. So
I have to make sure we get this in before we wrap up our conversation. The biggest thing that needs to be said is that healing is possible. And it breaks my heart that even in churches, the way our culture addresses it is that you never recover from grief, you just learn to live with it. And that is not true, and that is not biblical. So if we're using the example of the cross, Jesus went and he faced the cross and he endured the cross, and it was painful and it was hard. And he was resurrected and he was fully healed. And so even just saying that, I got to tell you, when I'm working with clients, what we have to undo is what they found in other support groups or sometimes from their own churches that say, well, you never recover from this. You just learn to get through it, or you learn to live with it. Why would you give permission for grief unending? That would be like when someone gets sick, just being like, oh, well, like if somebody got
they'll
cancer,
always be sick.
And you're like, oh, well, don't make a plan. Don't try to recover. Just accept the cancer and learn to live with it. We would never say that. That would be crazy.
No.
So why do we do that when it comes to grief? And it makes me so infuriated, especially when I hear the church touting that kind of stuff, because it's like, what did the cross pay for? What do we actually have access to? We need to be grabbing hold of every tool and resource we have, and grabbing hold of everything that Jesus paid for on the cross. Otherwise it's kind of spitting in the face of what he did, And so
for sure.
This is another thing that is available to us, and it is a process, and you do have to walk through it, but you can be you can be completely healed. You can be walking in fullness of joy and all that kind of stuff. And we just need a lot more examples of that out in the world, saying it's possible.
Oh, absolutely.
And showing people the way.
Our churches, I have this phrase I use a lot. I think local churches, and I'm absolutely convinced it's what God is doing here at First Congregational Church of Naples, a major part of God's intention here. We're a missions-minded church. They happen to call a pastor who is also a missionary, and we're a missions-minded church. We're a worshiping church. We're a fellowshipping church. But I'm convinced that God will increasingly turn this place into a healing community. There was a woman at a church I served previously whose son had committed suicide, And this woman, it really broke my heart because we did all of the memorial service. I invited her to be a part of. In fact, she had been a part of the Sacrament of Suffering, the grief share program. She had been a part of it before this happened, and she was working through loss of another family member. And even with all of that engagement, the church was not intrinsically enough of a healing community. At least I think this was a big part of it, where she felt like she had to go to another church. She had to get away from that community where it had happened in order to go find a new place for healing. But like, that's her church. That should be the place for healing. Now I understand some people are going to deal with grief differently. And for her, maybe seeing the same sights, it was just too much and she needed to be somewhere else. Okay, God bless her. But it made me at least really concerned about people's ability to find hope and healing where they already worship. There's a woman who's been coming to this church who I just love her. And she showed up, and it only reinforced my belief that the Holy Spirit is leading people here for healing. And she showed up here one day. She didn't know where to go. She prayed. She felt like God. She hadn't been real active in a church in a while. She prayed and asked God where to go, and somehow she ended up here. And I'm like, you came to the right place, because I may not have all the answers, but you're darn right. I'm going to walk through the questions with you. And she has, in the matter of maybe 18 months, lost a husband to cancer, a son to suicide, and then a daughter to largely an inexplicable, natural cause death.
Oh, wow.
All in the matter of a year and a half. And it's like, I said, look, my first piece of advice to you is, you do not do this alone. We're gonna do this together, and you can call me day or night, and we're gonna walk through this together. And so there are people out there looking for places of healing, is, I guess, my point for that. What I'm saying, and God bless you for answering that call, and for finding, I can't overstate how beautiful I think it is that God is doing this work in your life through you. And it's like, in my opinion, in my observation of the church, it couldn't be more needed, and it couldn't be less common. And so I'm excited to have you down here and to see where our friendship goes. You don't live all that far away. And who knows what the Lord will do out of these things. So
I'm excited too. And I'm excited that you're paying such attention to this, that this has been on your radar as a pastor, and recognizing the need, and recognizing, that's a rare thing to find as well. So I'm really glad to connect with you. I'm excited for the event.
Well, like I said, right, like my kids and some of my friends say, hey, you're like the anti-prosperity preacher. But I don't ever go I don't go on the offensive against the prosperity message. I'm just focused on something else that I really think I see in people's lives. So many people are so stuck, and to get unstuck into God's calling and freedom, you're going to have to deal with the grief and the pain and loss, and like you said, disappointment. My wife happens to hold degrees in Christian counseling, and informally does a lot of ministry at the church in those ways, and has counseled a number of people in a lot of these same situations. And she'll often tell people, one of the things you have to learn to do, and I think it's just a little piece of the picture, you have to recognize that there's real loss and disappointment, just in, like you said, just in daily things. And you have to learn to start forgiving, accepting and forgiving, for example, the things that didn't happen the way you hoped they would happen, the dreams that you had, and dealing with it, because there is a reality that you had certain dreams for your son and your relationship with your son. I have 5 kids. I know that. And, and part of that process is something, I love 12-step recovery programs, because I think there's a level of honesty that exists a lot of times in NA and AA that's sadly lacking sometimes in the church, because we want to put on, most people want their pastor to think they're a really holy person. And it's like, really, if you only knew how sinful I am, you would certainly not work so hard to impress me. But it's like in those programs, they'll deal with this is who I am. I'm a disaster. And then consequently, they'll say things like this phrase I've heard from a number of the, I'll sometimes visit groups with church members who are in recovery, that you have to learn to accept life on life's terms. Similarly, we need a biblical framework of understanding suffering and pain. And then we need the practical steps that you're offering to people to bring healing. So I'm excited about it. Thanks for joining me today on this. And so we'll share it with as many people, and we'll see who the Lord sends. And I think it'll be a really beneficial ministry.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Well, hey, God bless you today.
Thank
and
you.
we'll see you soon.
All right. See ya.